Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Match+Book series on the EBPL podcast. My name is Paul. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at East Brunswick Public Library. And we're here to go over some of your favorite genres, your favorite subjects in literature. I'm going to answer a few questions and provide some recommendations. We'll get started. Our first question says, I'm looking for a book that is built almost entirely on atmosphere. The plot or genre isn't particularly important. It just needs to really build a sense of time and place that keeps my attention. So, when I first read this question, the book that came to mind almost like immediately was We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This is probably her most famous novel, along with Haunting of Hill House. She also wrote the short story The Lottery, if you know that one, with the twist ending. This one has a twist ending as well, but of course, I'm not going to spoil it here. But the book mainly concerns two sisters who live on an estate with their uncle in Vermont 6 years before the novel. They are of the Blackwood clan. Their family experienced a tragedy that left the three survivors isolated on this estate in a small village. They exist almost entirely unto themselves. They're scared to go out and interact with the townspeople, and the townspeople kind of have this similar relationship with them, treating them as an oddity as well. It's interesting to see the relationship or lack of relationship between these two entities, these two parties. But the book builds toward the revelation of what happened that left them so isolated, and get inklings of it throughout the book because there isn't really that much plot, and the plot mainly serves the psychological narrative of it, the creeping eeriness of it, I would say, where there is this cold, chilling atmosphere that reflects the New England setting. It's almost built entirely on feeling, where there's so many chilling things that happen throughout the story, but the terrifying things are those that are left unsaid. This creep in between the printed lines that are hinted at and left for your brain to kind of go over and realize what the author isn't saying and what isn't entirely there. And it creates this effect of mood that whoever submitted this question, I know you would probably like it because it does have this effect on the reader. The next one I would recommend along these lines is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. It's about two dueling magicians who have been trained since their birth by their instructors, who the instructors themselves are kind of mercurial. They're a little wayward. You don't really understand their full intentions, and it creates this strange atmosphere where their proteges, the magicians who are the main characters in the story, have to prove they're excellent at magic in the night circus. It's a circus that only appears at night, and it provides this really great setting to showcase the dazzling prose that Morgenstern brings to the table, where she creates an atmosphere that really pulls you in. Whereas We've Always Lived in the Castles, a first person account from the perspective of the younger Blackwood child, and that kind of brings you into her own perspective. This book does the same thing, but through a third person omniscient viewpoint that makes you feel like you are one of the audience members in the circus. There's romance in the story. There's some action in the story, but I wouldn't call it romance. I wouldn't call it an action packed novel. I would say it really has to do with the inner workings of the circus, the instructors, and the magicians themselves. So the circus is really what is the overarching entity that propels the story forward. It creates all the atmosphere, all the mood in the story. I would put this in the category of regular literary fiction, although it does have a lot of elements of fantasy to it. So if it's not really your thing, but if you're looking to get into fantasy a little bit, I would definitely use this as a gateway for that genre. What draws you in is these two magicians really trying to figure out why they're pitted against each other. But in doing so, you get all these incredibly vivid descriptions of what the circus looked like, the food, the atmosphere, the different tents, the attractions, the sculptures, everything like that, the circus brings to the table. So to cap it off, even though it is fantastical in this way, it is also incredibly realistic in how the characters approach something that seems bizarre and strange and foreign. And the conclusion it reaches is really grounded in reality, the human experience for something that is so fantastical. And that's what I think leaves the reader satisfied with the conclusion of the novel. The next request for books was sent in by a reader who says, I enjoyed the last several books I got from the library, The Invention of Wings, The Leavers, Before We Were Yours, something along the lines of these would be good. I liked the Chinese American perspective of the characters in The Leavers. Diverse viewpoints are enlightening. Okay, this is a really great prompt for a question, and it could go in a number of directions, but I did want to provide one example, at least, that showcased the Chinese American perspective, because that is what the reader mentioned. For this, I selected Girl in Translation by Jean Kwok. It concerns a girl and her mother who immigrate from Hong Kong to Brooklyn, where they live in not so great conditions. And it mirrors the author's own trajectory in life, where she did the same thing with her mother when she was a young girl as well. So it is partly autobiographical, but from there, it contains a lot of experiences of her interactions with people, but the basic autobiographical nature of the plot ends there. Kimberly is still a young girl when she comes over from China, and she was an outstanding scholar in China, and she's trying to bring that same attentiveness to her studies in the United States. And she finds that difficult because not only are they impoverished and she doesn't have the time or the wherewithal to devote to her studies, but also the ridicule she faces from the children in school who can be so cruel to a new immigrant who's trying to do her best to assimilate, to just to fit in so that she's not criticized for any sort of differences. It's harrowing, and it's wonderfully portrayed in the novel. And it's also great to see how Kimberly, while she does struggle with this in school, how she brings this intelligence to other aspects of her life. Kimberly takes a job at a sweatshop to help make ends meet for her and her mom. And we see how that is a starting point to getting her to fit in a little bit and to kind of understand how social aspects work in the United States and really make her feel more comfortable in some ways. And what's great about it is you could see how Kimberly picks up on all of these different social cues, cultural cues, and uses her own intelligence to succeed. It's just nice to see how inventive she is. But at the same time, there's so much going on in the story about the immigrant experience where it's caught between two worlds almost, like desire to keep her cultural traditions alive while at the same time fitting in with people who are born in the United States as well, and really grappling with duties to their family versus to herself, which is a struggle that repeats over and over again in really interesting ways and has these varied outcomes. And that contrasted with her own desires and how she needs to look out for herself versus looking out for her family. It brought me to, I think, a world I don't really know, but to see it from the perspective of an author who has lived a life like this and who's experienced these things, I can't speak to the authenticity of it because I personally don't know much about it, but it felt realistic. The viewpoint felt extremely real to me. So I really did enjoy this one, and I would recommend it. The other book I wanted to mention along these lines with diverse viewpoints and characters is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. The author was raised in Ghana but grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and then attended Stanford. So she has this incredible life story of living in all these varied places, and yet she's still only 32 years old now, which is amazing. She wrote Homegoing when she was only 26, and it follows a family. It starts in Ghana in the 1700s, and it's a tremendous family saga where you follow certain characters throughout their lives in this family, starting in Ghana and going for 300 years, bit by bit, character by character, into the future. We followed two sisters in Ghana in the 1700s. They don't know the other one exists, so we're getting their own viewpoint distinct from the other. One marries a British prince, while the other is sold as a slave to the United States. For the most part, these two distinct threads in the storyline One stays in Ghana for the most part, while the other primarily takes place in the United States. Now, with family sagas and things like this, where you only follow characters for a chapter or two, and then you move on to the next one, I often find you don't understand the character well enough. And that is what leads me to not read books like this. But I find this book is uniquely positioned to provide this depth of character in such a short amount of writing. So as we go into the future and read about new characters, you still get more information and background about the characters who came before that we've read about already. So you feel like they're still part of the story, even though they're not the focus of the chapter. It builds on itself in a way that is really quite entertaining and provides a real legacy to the characters themselves. You can see these tiny events that don't seem particularly significant at the time build throughout the chapters down the road and become something so much greater than it seemed like before. In that way, they are so connected and tethered, even though the characters themselves might be in the past. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the author and how she was able to put all of this together in a way that actually makes sense and is easy to follow, even though it seemed like initially it might not be, or you might lose focus over who this character was or who that character was in the past, but still feel those characters in the present, even when their chapter has passed and you don't hear from them anymore. So please, if you like books with these diverse viewpoints and characters, please check out those two. That's all I have for you today. And again, the EBPL podcast can be listened to at anchor.fm/EBPL library or wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you to Melissa Hosick for editing this episode. And thank you for listening.